When a night shift nurse enters an abandoned operating theater, she hears a scream she instantly recognizes, her own. As she searches for its source, she uncovers a horrific truth. She may already be the patient, and the hospital may be feeding on her terror to stay alive. The clock struck midnight at Saint Dymphna's hospital, and the halls grew silent except for the low hum of dying fluorescent lights. Eliza Ward had done night shifts before, but this one felt different. The West Wing was closed after a fire years ago, yet she'd been assigned to check it. Alone, as she moved past locked doors and flickering monitors, the hospital seemed to breathe around her, stretching the corridors longer than they should be. Patient charts displayed names she didn't recognize, one of them her own. And then, from the sealed operating theater, came a single scream, raw, guttural, and unmistakably hers. Terrified but compelled, Eliza follows the sound into the forbidden wing, unaware she's stepping into a trap built from her own past, her own pain, and a nightmare the hospital refuses to let die. Rain clung to the city like an old secret, soaking every alley and empty street. From her car, Eliza Ward stared up at the hospital's facade. A 30-year-old shell patched over with modern wings, its neon sign flickering in the mist. SETL. She'd seen plenty of hospitals, but nothing about this one felt standard. It loomed like a patient who refused to die. She sat for a moment, engine off, letting the wipers squeak across glass. Her reflection in the driver's window looked pale, almost transparent. It had been 6 months since she'd transferred from Mercy General, and still she hadn't gotten used to Saint Dymphna's night shifts, especially the West Wing. Fire, damaged, under renovation, though she'd never seen a single construction crew in all her nights here. Inside, the hospital smelled of antiseptic layered over damp plaster and something faintly metallic. The hallways were half lit to conserve power at night, leaving stretches of darkness between islands of flickering fluorescent tubes. On the PA, a low static hiss crackled between sporadic announcements, like a throat trying to clear itself. Eliza clipped her badge to her scrub top and headed for the nurse's station. Head nurse Margaret was there, as always. Her silver hair was knotted tight, her eyes black pinpoints above her mask. "You're on your own tonight," she said without looking up from a clipboard. Everyone else called out. Again, Eliza tried to sound casual. "That's the 3rd time this month." Margaret's eyes flicked up hard. "Stay out of the West Wing. Maintenance says there's exposed wiring. The last thing we need is another accident." Another accident. As if the hospital kept a running tally. Eliza forced a smile. Noted. She checked her rounds list. The patient roster was thin. 2 post-ops on IV drips, 1 psychiatric transfer sedated and restrained, a single ER holdover. Yet at the bottom of the sheet, in black marker, someone had scrawled 300 AM West Wing check. No initials. No signature. "Margaret?" Eliza asked, holding up the sheet. "Who wrote this?" Margaret had already walked away, heels echoing on tile. "Do your rounds," she called back, voice fading. The first hour passed quietly. Eliza took vitals, adjusted drips, charted notes. The building's hum filled the background, a steady, industrial heartbeat. But she kept feeling eyes on her, glances from darkened doorways or from the reflective sheen of supply closet windows. Every time she turned, nothing but emptiness. At 12:40 AM, the intercom hissed to life. Nurse Ward to West Wing. Her name, clear and cold, whispered through the static. No code. No explanation. Eliza froze. "Margaret?" She asked the empty hall. No answer. The PA popped off with a faint click. She checked the time. 2 hours before the supposed West Wing check. Her heart thumped like a dropped instrument. She decided to call security. The phone at the station emitted only a dead tone, then a faint, wet noise like someone breathing underwater. She hung up fast, pulse racing. At 1:15 a.m. she finally gave in. She wasn't superstitious, she was a nurse. This was just an old building with bad wiring and a worse intercom. She grabbed her flashlight, clipped it to her scrubs, and followed the corridor toward the West Wing. The further she went, the older the hospital became. The floors changed from polished tile to worn linoleum, walls narrowing into a suffocating throat. Paint peeled in damp curls. A smell like wet ash crept up from the basement. A metal door blocked the end of the hall, its paint blistered black from the fire. A faded biohazard sticker clung crookedly to its center. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in marker, KEP Losity INCID Unity RVEW. She pressed her ear to the door. At first she heard nothing. Then, a faint sound. It was like a woman's voice echoing up a stairwell, but stretched, distorted. She stepped back, heart hammering. The noise stopped. Her flashlight flickered. On her way back to the station, she noticed something odd on a patient chart left on a rolling cart. The name field read Eliza Ward in block capitals. Below it, age 28. Procedure scheduled 0300 a.m. Surgeon Dr. Adrian Crow. She blinked hard. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. "This isn't funny," she whispered, scanning the hallway. "Only silence." She shoved the chart back on the cart and hurried away. Back at the station, Margaret was gone. Her chair spun slightly as if she'd just left. Eliza picked up the phone again, still dead. She tried the PA microphone. All she got was her own voice echoing back, half a second late, like a mocking twin. She checked the wall clock. 10:25 a.m. Her rounds were technically complete. Only the West Wing check remained. The thought of walking back down that corridor felt like volunteering for her own funeral. She poured coffee from the pot in the break room, but the liquid came out black and viscous, thicker than it should be. She dumped it down the sink and splashed cold water on her face. Her reflection looked distorted in the steel faucet, lips moving out of sync. She yanked back and nearly fell. At 20:40 a.m. the intercom hissed again. This time the voice was unmistakable. "Eliza Ward, operating theater now." The words slithered out, low and stretched, yet perfectly her own voice. She dropped the coffee cup. It shattered on the tile. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The PA crackled once more. "We're waiting for you." She ran back to the sealed door at 2:55 a.m., driven by some terrible magnetism. The corridor was darker now, as if the hospital itself had inhaled all the light. The metal door stood slightly ajar. A thin ribbon of cold air leaked out, carrying a smell like antiseptic mixed with burning hair. Eliza pushed the door wider. The operating theater inside was wrecked. Gurneys overturned, steel tables warped from heat, walls scorched black. Yet surgical lamps above flickered with fresh, white light. Instruments gleamed on trays as if someone had just prepared them. At the center of the room stood an operating table under a cone of pale light. A figure lay on it, sheet pulled over the body. Eliza's feet moved on their own, bringing her closer. She reached for the sheet, her fingers trembling. Then she heard it. From somewhere deeper in the theater, a woman screaming. Her own voice, raw and breaking, echoing off tile and steel. She spun toward the sound. It came from behind a set of swinging doors leading to a smaller prep room. Each time the scream rose, it doubled back on itself, like a recording looped and distorted. "Who's there?" she called, voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The scream stopped. The silence pressed in. She backed toward the door, but the body on the table shifted. The sheet twitched. Something under it inhaled, shuddering. Then, in perfect unison with her own breath, the figure on the table exhaled. Eliza bolted, slamming the door behind her. She sprinted down the corridor, a flashlight beam jittering across peeling walls. In the distance, she could still hear the faint echo of her own screams. Or the screams of someone who sounded exactly like her, chasing her through the halls. She didn't stop until she was back at the nurses' station, gasping. The clock read 3:10 a.m. Margaret's chair sat empty. The phones were still dead. But the chart on the counter had changed again. In red ink, now, procedure completed. Patient status pending. Below that, a new line returned to theater for post-op evaluation. Eliza crumpled the paper in her hands, tears streaking down her cheeks. She felt a tremor in the floor beneath her, like something stirring deep under the hospital, pulling her back. Somewhere down the hall, her own voice began to scream again. Eliza sat motionless at the nurse's station for nearly 10 minutes, gripping the chart like it was a weapon. The walls of the corridor still trembled faintly, as if the hospital itself was breathing. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "Get a grip," she told herself. "You're overtired. Hallucinating. This place is old. This place is weird. But you're not losing your mind." She glanced at the wall clock, 3:19 a.m. Her badge monitor still blinked green, logging her shift. No one had come back to the station. Margaret was gone. Security was gone. The halls looked emptier than they ever had before. A phone on the counter rang. She jumped. It was an old corded landline, the one they never used anymore. She hesitated, then picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then a voice like a whisper through gauze. "You're late." The line went dead. Eliza slammed the receiver down and bolted upright. Enough was enough. She needed someone else here. Another nurse, a doctor, anyone. She decided to check the doctor's lounge at the far end of the East Wing. Dr. Crow sometimes stayed overnight after difficult surgeries. If anyone could explain why her name was on a death chart, it would be him. The East Wing felt newer but no less strange. The halls here were wider, painted a muted blue. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering as if reacting to her passage. At the lounge door she paused, listening. Low voices murmured within. She pushed the door open. Inside, the lounge smelled of stale coffee and overcooked microwave meals. Dr. Adrian Crow sat at a table, his long fingers steepled under his chin. He looked up as if he'd been expecting her. "Ah, Nurse Ward." His voice was low, cultured, a contrast to the hospital's raw industrial noise. "You've been exploring places you shouldn't." She blinked. "What? What do you mean?" His eyes glimmered under the fluorescent lights. The West Wing. The theater. "You heard something, didn't you?" Eliza swallowed. "I heard my own voice." "That's how it starts," Crow said. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Sit." She stayed standing. "My name was on a patient chart for a surgery scheduled at 3 a.m. Crow's lips curved faintly. "Then you understand more than most." "Is this a joke?" she demanded. "Because if it is, it's sick." "No joke." He leaned back. "This hospital is built on layers. Old wings, old wards. Sometimes they overlap. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, you meet yourself." Eliza felt the room tilt. "Meet myself." "The echoes," Crow murmured. "That's what we call them. This place remembers everyone who's died here. Sometimes it plays them back. Sometimes," he trailed off, studying her face. "Sometimes it pulls the living in." Her hands trembled. "You're saying the theater is haunted." "I'm saying I'm hungry." His smile did not reach his eyes. and it's like nurses. She backed away. I'm calling the police, Crow shrugged. Go ahead, but by the time they arrive, there will be nothing to find, except maybe your badge, on the floor. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. A folded photograph, yellowed at the edges. She hesitated, then picked it up. It was a personal photo of a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform. White dress, paper cap. The name on the badge read Eliza Ward. The face was hers, though the picture looked decades old. Her stomach dropped. This is a trick. Crow leaned in. That photo is from 1974. She died in the fire that closed the West Wing. She was 28. The same age you are now. Eliza stumbled back against the door frame. No, I'm not her. I'm not. Crow's expression softened just slightly. Maybe not. Or maybe you're what was left behind. The fluorescent light above them popped, raining sparks. For an instant the room was dark. When the emergency light kicked in, Crow was standing inches from her, one hand on her shoulder. You can't run from it, he said. You're already inside the theater, whether you realize it or not. She shoved him off, bolting from the lounge. His voice followed her down the corridor. 3 o'clock wasn't the beginning. It was the call back. She didn't stop running until she reached the stairwell. Her breath rasped against the concrete walls. The stairwell door to the basement stood ajar, even though it was supposed to be locked after midnight. A thin light glowed from below, pulsing like a heartbeat. Eliza gripped the railing. Don't, she whispered to herself. Don't go down. A sound drifted up, the faint chime of surgical instruments clinking together. And beneath it, the slow intake of breath, exactly matching her own. She slammed the stairwell door shut and ran back toward the main station. Her badge beeped each time she passed a sensor, but the screens at the nurse's station no longer showed her location. Only a static silhouette marked UKOWN moving through the West Wing. When she reached the station, a new folder lay on the counter. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were surgical consent forms already filled out, her own signature at the bottom. Above it, written in looping cursive post, operative instructions return to theater. A cold breeze brushed her neck. She spun around. The hallway behind her was empty, yet she could hear footsteps echoing. Hers a half-beat delayed, like someone following invisibly. The intercom hissed again. This time it didn't whisper, it screamed. Her own voice, raw and ragged, blasted from the speakers. Hey, LPME! Happer men! The sound cut off. Static filled the halls like fog. Eliza dropped to her knees, clutching her ears. The walls felt closer now. The ceiling lower, the lights dimmer. A shadow passed across the nurse's station window. Her own shape, but taller. Its head tilting at an unnatural angle. When she blinked, it was gone. She staggered to her feet. I'm leaving, she muttered. Right now. She headed for the main exit. The automatic doors wouldn't open. The glass reflected her face, but not her body, as if she'd already gone invisible from the shoulders down. Behind her, a gurney squealed across the tile. She spun. It was rolling toward the elevator on its own, its wheels squealing, a white sheet covering something that rose and fell as if breathing. The elevator dinged open. Inside, she glimpsed stainless steel walls and, beyond them, the scorched tile of the operating theater instead of the usual hospital floor. The gurney rolled in. The doors closed. Eliza bolted for the stairwell again, only to find the door to the basement now wide open. Light pulsed below like a warning. On the wall beside it, written in red marker, was a message, Wio Rkeuntolowakup. She backed away, trembling. Wake up, she whispered. I'm not asleep." Her own voice echoed back from the stairwell, distorted. "You're not awake either." She fled to the break room, slammed the door, locked it. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. Her reflection stared back from the microwave door, lips moving without sound. She grabbed the phone on the wall. It rang once before she could dial. She answered. Eliza Ward, her own voice said. "Prep yourself. The surgery begins in 10 minutes. Then silence. She dropped the phone and sank to the floor, sobbing. Somewhere far below, in the theater, the surgical lamps clicked on one by one. The hospital felt different after the call, as though every corridor had shifted slightly, as though her every footstep echoed through a copy of itself a fraction of a second later. Eliza pressed her palms to the break room floor until the tremor in her hands subsided. She couldn't stop seeing that elevator closing on a corridor that didn't belong to this building. A soft beep startled her. Her pager flashed room 12. She froze. Room 12 belonged to a transfer patient sedated after a psychotic episode. She hadn't been in there yet tonight. The chart said stable, no visitors. She rose shakily. If there was a living, breathing patient upstairs, maybe they could anchor her to reality. She walked the hallway like a diver in deep water, everything slow, muffled. Each step squeaked too loudly on the linoleum. At the junction, she saw the door to room 12 cracked open, dim light spilling into the hall. "Eliza," the voice floated out low and strained. "Come in." Her stomach clenched. She hadn't given her name. She pushed the door open. Room 12 was almost completely dark except for the ECG monitor glowing faint green. The patient lay propped against white pillows, wrists strapped loosely to the rails. The overhead light above the bed flickered. Eliza's breath caught. The patient was her. Or rather, it looked like her, same hair, same angular cheeks. Same scar on the left eyebrow from a childhood fall. This version of her looked paler, like a washed-out photograph. A deep bruise marred the side of the throat. "I was wondering when you'd get here," the double murmured. Eliza backed up until her spine met the wall. "No. You're sedated. You're a hallucination." The patient smiled faintly. "You're the hallucination." Eliza's pulse hammered in her ears. "Woo, what are you?" "You were supposed to die in the fire," the other Eliza whispered. "But you didn't. Not entirely. They pulled you out, rebuilt you, but some of you stayed behind." "That's me." Eliza tried to summon her training. "This isn't real. You're dissociating." "I'm dissociating." The double laughed softly, a dry, papery sound. "Does it matter? You're scheduled for surgery at 3. They need to finish what they started." She yanked at her restraints with sudden strength. The straps creaked but didn't break. "If you don't go, they'll come for me instead. They'll cut me open to find the part of you that stayed." Eliza's throat went dry. "Who are they?" The double tilted her head toward the ceiling. A low hum vibrated through the walls. "The hospital. The theater. Dr. Crow. The screamer. It's all the same." The ECG monitor beeped irregularly, then flatlined for a moment before resuming. The lights flickered off, plunging the room into darkness. When they came back on, the bed was empty. Eliza ran to it, ripping back the sheets. Only the indent remained where the body had lain, still warm. She grabbed the chart from the foot of the bed. Under patient name, it read Ward Ely. Under our status, transferred to Theta Yo 2:59 a.m. She dropped the chart and fled. Back in the hallway, she heard wheels squeaking, a gurney being pushed. She ducked behind a supply cart and peeked. 2 orderlies in outdated uniforms were rolling a covered stretcher toward the elevator. Their faces were obscured by surgical masks yellowed with age. Eliza saw an arm slip from under the sheet, pale, with her own ID bracelet on the wrist. She darted out. "Stop! That's my..." The orderlies didn't react. Pushing the gurney into the elevator, the doors slid shut silently. She lunged forward, slamming the button. The panel flickered. Instead of numbers, it displayed a single word, Tishiata. She ran to the stairwell, heart hammering. The steps down looked endless, disappearing into a pale glow. As she hesitated, something clattered above her. Another gurney rolling, a voice muttering overhead, a shape moving. She bolted down the stairs. The air grew colder with each level, smelling of wet ash and formaldehyde. Pipes lined the walls, dripping. She emerged into the basement corridor. It looked like no part of the hospital she knew. Lower ceilings, cracked tile, walls painted with peeling murals of children's faces faded to smudges. At the end of the hall, a door stood open marked Operaten Shiatami. Beyond it glowed surgical lamps and moving shadows. Eliza. The voice came from behind her. She spun. Dr. Krause stood at the stairwell entrance, hands gloved, mask dangling around his neck. His eyes gleamed. "It's time?" "No," she snapped. "I'm not going in there." "You already are." He held up a clipboard. Consent signed. Prep complete. He stepped closer. "If you fight it, it will be worse." She backed away. "You're insane." "No, I'm practical." He stopped, tilting his head. "Do you hear it?" She did. A high, thin wail rising from the theater, her own voice, pleading, tearing at her eardrums. Crow extended a hand. "Come. See for yourself." She shook her head violently. "Stay away from me." Something flickered at the edge of her vision. Another crow, standing just behind the first, identical but flickering like bad film. Then another Eliza behind her, pale and silent. The walls quivered. The floor bulged upward like flesh under a knife. Eliza screamed and bolted down the hall toward the theater. Inside, the theater looked almost normal again. Sterile, clean, humming with the soft buzz of equipment. Nurses in white masks moved about preparing trays. None of them had faces, their skin stretched blank and smooth. At the center lay the operating table. Under the lights, a body twitched beneath a sheet. A surgeon bent over it with a scalpel, his back to her. "Stop!" Eliza cried. The surgeon turned. It was her father, or rather, the shape of him as she remembered before he died years ago, but wearing Dr. Crow's mask. His eyes were empty sockets filled with black light. The body on the table thrashed, pulling at restraints. The sheet slipped to reveal a face. Her own mouth open in a silent scream. She staggered backward, hand over her mouth. The blank-faced nurses turned toward her in unison. One reached for a tray, lifted a surgical mask, and held it out to her. "It's your turn," it said in her own voice. She spun to run, but the doors slammed shut, sealing her in. The theater pulsed, the lights dimming and flaring like a heartbeat. She felt hands seize her arms, cold, gloved, pulling her toward the table, her double-screamed eyes locking on hers. "Wake up! Before they cut you out of me!" A blinding flash. Eliza was standing in the hallway outside the nurse's station again, gasping for air. The clock read 3:41 a.m. The hospital was silent. The chart on the counter now read procedure completed, patient stable. Post, op room 12. She stumbled to room 12. The bed was made. No patients. Only a single object sat on the pillow, her own ID badge, burned at the edges, the barcode melted. From the intercom, her own voice whispered, almost tender, "Don't be late for rounds." Eliza stood frozen in the doorway of room 12, staring at her burned badge on the pillow. The overhead light hummed faintly, flickering once, then stabilizing. It felt like the room itself was waiting for her to pick the badge up. She reached for it slowly. The plastic was warped, edges melted into sharp little petals. The barcode was obliterated, but her photo stared back from a pocket of untouched plastic, eyes wide, as though she'd been caught mid-scream. A movement in the hallway reflected in the metal rail of the bed. She spun. Nothing there. She slipped the badge into her scrub pocket and backed out. Every nerve in her body screamed to leave. But some deeper pull dragged her toward the west wing. The hospital seemed to stretch the halls longer, her shoes squeaking over linoleum that didn't look quite real anymore. At the nurse's station, a single line blinked on the screen where the patient list had been Ward, Eliza, Post, Obisa Vion. Tishta, her hands hovered over the keyboard. The keys were soft as wax, letters melting under her touch. She yanked her hands back and the screen went black. She turned toward the corridor. The sealed fire door at the end now stood open. Beyond it, faint surgical light pulsed like a distant lighthouse. Eliza. The whisper floated down the hall. Her own voice, but drawn out and blurred, like a tape played backward. She walked forward, not entirely in control of her legs. The hallway narrowed as she went, ceiling dipping lower and the tiles darker. She passed through an archway that hadn't been there before. Wrought iron. Hospital signage replaced by rusted metal letters spelling THR. Inside, the walls sweated moisture. Her footsteps echoed like drips in a cavern. She reached the operating theater doors. Frosted glass windows sat at eye level, covered in soot. Through it she could see shapes moving. She pressed her face to the glass, cupping her hands to block glare. A pale figure paced within, head bent, arms gripping its own body. Another stood over an operating table. Something glimmered like metal swinging under light. Then she heard it again, a scream, sharp and guttural, tearing through the walls. Her own voice. She flinched back. The scream kept going, vibrating in her bones. A face pressed suddenly to the other side of the glass. Her own. Hair plastered to her skull, eyes hollow and wide. Mouth open in a silent wail. It slapped a palm to the glass. She mirrored it without thinking. Then it was gone. The doors swung inward with a groan. Cold air spilled out, smelling of bleach and old smoke. Eliza hesitated on the threshold, then stepped in. The theater had changed again. It looked like it might have before the fire, gleaming white tile, stainless steel counters, overhead lamps polished like mirrors. Nurses in crisp uniforms moved about in slow, deliberate motions. But when she tried to focus on their faces, they blurred. The central operating table gleamed under a cone of sterile light. Instruments arranged on a tray shimmered as though dipped in mercury. "Hello," she called, voice trembling. Every head turned toward her at once. The movement was perfectly synchronized. One of the nurses stepped forward. Its mask was white cloth, but behind it no face moved, just smooth skin. It held out a folded piece of paper. Eliza took it with shaking hands. It was another chart. Her own name at the top. Under procedure excision of redundant self. Surgeon Dr. Adrian Crow. She dropped it, heart hammering. "I'm leaving." The nurse tilted its head. "You already left," it said in her own voice. The lights flickered. The nurses dissolved into static outlines. The walls rippled, melting like wax. Beneath them she glimpsed the scorched black tile from the fire, then an even older layer, brick walls weeping water, pipes like veins. The scream rose again, louder, vibrating her teeth. She clapped her hands to her ears, but it was inside her head. "Stop!" she yelled. "Stop it." The overhead lamps burst, showering sparks. In the strobing dark, she saw a shape moving toward her, tall, thin. draped in something that might have been a nurse's dress or a shroud. Its face flickered between hers and a skull. It opened its mouth, and the scream poured out, endless. She stumbled back, hitting the operating table. The sheet slid off the body lying there. It was herself again, pale, eyes taped shut, chest rising and falling shallowly. A long incision traced the sternum, held together with black sutures. "No," she whispered. The lying version of herself opened its eyes. "Wake up," it croaked, lips splitting as though unused. "You're next." Hands seized her from behind, gloved hands cold as ice. She thrashed, elbowing one, but there were too many. They lifted her onto a second table adjacent to the first. Straps cinched her wrists and ankles. Above, the surgical lamp flickered back to life, glaring white. A shape leaned over her, masked, scalpel flashing. Through the mask she saw Dr. Crow's eyes, but older, sunken, as though decades had passed. "You signed the consent?" he murmured. "We're only finishing the job," she struggled, screaming. The other Eliza on the next table screamed with her, same pitch, same terror. Their voices merged into one echo, filling the theater. Crow raised the scalpel. Excision begins. The room exploded into black static. Eliza was standing in the hallway again, clutching the burned badge, gasping for air. The theater doors stood closed as if they'd never been opened. She spun, dizzy. The clock on the wall read 4:12 a.m. Her hands shook violently, nails bitten into her palms. She opened her fist and found a sliver of metal, a surgical scalpel, fresh blood on its edge. From down the hall, the scream began again, softer now, like an echo from miles away, but still her own voice. She stumbled toward the nurse's station. The monitors there displayed a single sentence in flickering green letters. "YOUSBEADMED." She backed away. The floor beneath her rippled like liquid. Her reflection stared up at her from the tile, mouth moving independently. In the reflection, she saw herself strapped to the table, Dr. Crow leaning over, the scalpel descending. She bolted, sprinting back toward the main lobby. But the hallway ended in a wall that hadn't been there before, painted white with a single red line at shoulder height, a handwritten sign above read "Eliza Ward." She turned. Behind her stood the tall shadow, draped in a nurse's dress. Its face was entirely hers now, eyes weeping black fluid. "Back to your station," it whispered. Eliza ran blindly into another corridor, breath tearing at her throat. She slammed open a door marked CH Pell and locked it behind her. Inside the hospital chapel, pews sat dust-covered. Candles flickered though she hadn't lit them. A crucifix hung crooked, one arm broken. She slumped into a pew, head in hands, trying to breathe. A voice whispered from the altar. "You're still asleep." She looked up. The altar cloth had been pulled aside to reveal a gurney instead of a table, covered in a white sheet. A lump moved under it, breathing. The sheet slid off to reveal her double again, lying still, eyes open. "Help me," it whispered, before they cut us apart completely. The chapel door rattled, hinges groaning. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. Eliza backed toward the altar. The double sat up, swinging its legs over the gurney. "We can't both exist. That's why it hurts." The door burst inward. Dr. Crow stepped inside, face half in shadow. "Eliza Ward," he intoned, voice echoing unnaturally. "You're scheduled for debriefing." Her double hissed and dissolved into a swarm of black moths, scattering across the chapel ceiling. Crow advanced, surgical mask dangling from one hand. "Come quietly. It's easier that way." Eliza seized a brass candle holder and swung it. Sparks flew as it struck a pew. She backed up toward a side door. Crow smiled thinly. "Still fighting?" She bolted through the side door into a maintenance passage, running blind. Pipes dripped overhead, and the walls narrowed until she had to turn sideways. Behind her, Crow's footsteps followed, slow and patient. She burst into a small room lined with old oxygen tanks. A single emergency light glowed. She collapsed against a tank, gasping. From a speaker high on the wall, her own voice whispered, "You can't run from yourself." Eliza pressed her hands to her ears, sobbing. The metal beneath her vibrated as if something large was moving inside the walls. Then the whisper turned into a scream. Not a loud one, but a high, thin shriek threading through every pipe. The light flickered out. In the dark, she felt something brush her shoulder. Cold fingers. Eliza, her own voice whispered from inches away. "Wake up." The oxygen tank room was a black lung of metal. Eliza crouched against the wall, arms wrapped tight, as her own whispered voice fizzed through the pipes. Each word felt like it came from inside her ribs, vibrating against bone. She tried to slow her breathing, but her chest heaved in small convulsions. The scalpel she'd picked up in the theater was still clutched in her hand. It glimmered faintly even in the dark. Footsteps entered the room, not quick or hesitant, but steady, deliberate. A match scraped. A small yellow flame bloomed, hallowing a pale face. Dr. Crow. He held the match before his eyes. Lighting a thin cigarette like an old photograph came to life. The glow illuminated his gaunt cheeks, his eyes shadowed but glittering. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "This level isn't for staff." Eliza raised the scalpel. "Stay back. I swear all." He exhaled a long stream of smoke. "Cut me. You've already done that. More times than you remember." She blinked, trying to focus. "What are you talking about?" Crow walked closer, the smoke curling around his head like a second halo. "You think you're the only Eliza Ward." Her fingers trembled on the scalpel handle. "I'm not." "Not what?" He crouched, eyes level with hers. "Not dead, not screaming. Not strapped down in the theater right now." She backed away until her spine pressed against an oxygen tank. "I saw myself on the table." Crow smiled faintly. "Yes, you're the patient and the nurse, the operator and the operator. We're finishing what was started when you burned." Eliza's voice cracked. "What did you do to me?" Crow's eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "It wasn't me. It was this place. Saint Dymphna's was built over older ground. Some spaces remember pain. Some spaces learn to shape it. We only harvest what grows." He flicked the cigarette butt away. It hissed on the wet floor. "You're not here to save patients. You're here to feed the theater." Her heart thudded like a fist in her throat. "No," she whispered. "I'm real. I'm alive." Crow tilted his head, real enough to scream. "That's all the theater needs." He reached into his coat and withdrew a thin file. He dropped it on the floor between them. Eliza hesitated, then snatched it up. Inside grainy black and white photos of the fire, the West Wing collapsed into ash. A body bag tagged Ward, Eliza deceased. Her personnel photo stared up at her, eyes closed, lips blackened with soot. "No," she whispered. "That's not me." Crow's voice was almost kind. "It was. But pain doesn't burn. It lingers. The theater caught you, and it's been looping your shift ever since." The pipes vibrated with a long moan. She pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop it, stop it." Crow leaned close, whispering. "You can stop it. But you must return. Complete the excision, or you'll keep wandering halls that aren't there forever." Her hands shook violently. The scalpel dropped to the floor, clattering. I don't want to die," she said. Crow's expression hardened. You're not dying. You're waking up. The emergency light blinked out. When it flickered back on, Crow was gone. Only his cigarette ember remained on the floor, fading to nothing. Eliza stumbled to her feet. The room's far wall now showed an opening that hadn't been there. A corridor sloping downward, lined with greenish tiles, leading toward a low glow. Her badge buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. The melted plastic now displayed a single word, Dabaduen. She gritted her teeth, pocketed the badge, and stepped into the corridor. The slope descended deeper into the hospital's belly. Water dripped from pipes overhead. A faint, rhythmic thump echoed through the walls like a heartbeat. As she walked, she began to see murals painted under the peeling tiles, crude surgical diagrams, outlines of bodies split in half, organs labeled with looping handwriting. In each drawing, the patient's face was hers. Her shoes squeaked on the wet floor. Ahead, the corridor opened into a round chamber with a grated floor. In the center stood a gurney surrounded by candles burned down to stumps. Above it hung an operating lamp, its light weak but steady. A figure stood beside the gurney, head nurse Margaret. The older woman looked different in the dim glow, taller, thinner, her uniform crisp but stained at the cuffs. "About time," Margaret said. Her voice carried easily in the chamber. Shift change was at 3. Eliza stopped at the threshold. "What is this?" Margaret's eyes gleamed like whetstones. "Orientation. You're almost finished." She gestured to the gurney. "Lie down. It will be easier." Eliza shook her head violently. "No. I'm leaving?" Margaret sighed, setting down a tray of instruments. "You always say that." The chamber's walls shuddered. Pipes rattled overhead. Water sprayed from a joint, misting the air. Eliza backed toward the corridor, but the opening had sealed, replaced by smooth tile. Margaret lifted a scalpel, her movements slow and inevitable. Every scream feeds the hospital. But every scream also feeds you. That's why you're still here. Eliza raised her hands. "Stay away from me." Margaret's face flickered, briefly revealing the screamer's hollow-eyed mask. "You're not separate from it?" she hissed. "You are it." Eliza bolted around the chamber, looking for another exit. She found a rusted door half, hidden behind a pillar. She yanked it open and stumbled into a narrow stairwell spiraling down. The steps were slick, concrete crumbling under her shoes. She descended blindly, hearing Margaret's voice echo from above. "We'll finish the shift one way or another." Down and down until the stairwell spat her out into a vast underground space. The original operating theater, untouched by fire. Here the ceiling arched like a cathedral. Surgical lights hung like chandeliers. Rows of rusted seats rose in a semicircle, an audience of shadows. The center held a single raised platform with an operating table strapped in iron. Above the table, a screen flickered with static. For an instant, it showed a hospital security feed, Eliza running down a hall, Margaret following. Then static again. A figure stood at the table, herself, wearing a pristine nurse uniform, hair neatly pinned. This version of Eliza turned toward her and smiled with blood-red lips. "Welcome back," it said. Eliza staggered forward. "Ooh, who are you?" "I'm the one who stayed," the double said, the part that obeyed. The nurse, not the patient. She approached the table, reaching out. "Help me." The double shook its head. "You can't be help. You're the cut piece. The trauma? The hospital keeps us so it can keep operating." Behind the double, shapes moved in the audience seats. Nurses without faces, patients with bandaged heads, all leaning forward, silent. The double gestured to the table. "Lie down, merge with me. Or you'll keep running these halls until the end of time." Eliza's head spun. The heartbeat in the walls grew louder. She felt something like a knife pressing at the back of her skull. She took a step forward, then another. The double's eyes shone with pity. At the edge of the platform, she stopped. "If I lie down, I die." The double tilted its head. "If you lie down, you stop dying." Eliza gripped the scalpel in her fist. "No," she whispered. "I'm not a cut piece. I'm a whole person." The double smiled sadly. "Then fight." The audience hissed in unison, a sound like air escaping a lung. The lights flickered. Eliza lunged. The double lunged back. Their hands met on the scalpel. A shock tore through her. An electric jolt of memory. Fire, screaming patients, Dr. Crow's voice calling a code blue. She saw herself strapped to the table, felt the scalpel's first cut. She remembered dying. She wrenched free, gasping. The double stood frozen, eyes wide, as if Eliza had pulled something vital out of it. Then alarms began to blare, a low, whooping sound rolling through the underground theater. Red lights strobed. The audience vanished like smoke. The double staggered, reaching for her. "You can't run forever. Next time it will be worse." Eliza backed toward the stairs. "Then I'll burn it all down," she said. The double smiled faintly. "We tried that once." She bolted up the stairs, the sound of alarms fading behind her. The stairwell twisted strangely, spitting her into a corridor she didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The walls were clean, the tiles pale green, normal hospital decor. For a moment she thought she'd escaped. She turned a corner and collided with Detective Ortiz. "Whoa," he said, catching her by the shoulders. "Are you okay? I've been looking all over." "Get out," she gasped. "You don't understand. It's not real." Ortiz frowned. "Slow down. You're Eliza Ward, right? The nurse." She stared at him. "You can see me." "Of course I can see you." He looked around. "This wing is supposed to be sealed. What's going on down here?" She grabbed his hand. "Please, we have to leave. Now." From down the hall came the faint sound of a scream, hers rising and falling like a siren. Ortiz stiffened. What the hell was that? Eliza pulled him. "Move." They ran together toward the elevators, footsteps echoing. The lights flickered, dimmed. As they reached the elevator doors, Ortiz jabbed the button repeatedly. "Come on." Eliza looked back. The corridor behind them was lengthening, walls bending, ceiling sagging. Something moved at the far end, a tall shape in a nurse's dress, its face hers but hollow. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. They lunged inside. Ortiz hit the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut just as the shape reached them, slapping a pale hand against the metal. The elevator rattled upward. Ortiz wiped sweat from his brow. What the hell is happening? Eliza leaned against the wall, trembling. It's the hospital. It feeds on pain. It's been feeding on me. He stared. "You sound insane." "I know," she whispered. "But it's true." Above them, the speaker crackled. A soft female voice. Distorted next stop operating theater. Ortiz's eyes widened. "I didn't press that." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Neither did I." The elevator lights flickered red. Eliza finally reaches the heart of the abandoned operating theater, where the screamer waits. A twisted version of herself, created from the trauma of her death in the hospital fire. She learns she isn't alive at all, but the hospital's echo kept looping through endless night shifts to feed its hunger for pain. In a desperate act of defiance, she tears free of the straps, merging with the screamer and ending the split between her living self and her shadow. The hospital shudders, monitors flatline, and for a brief moment everything goes silent, Detective Ortiz and a rescue crew break into the sealed wing only to find two Elizas on the table. One burned and one pristine, both lifeless. The operating theater lights flicker out one by one, leaving only darkness. On the nurse's station monitor, a single line appears. WR. NXTC FAB NTD outside. Ortiz hears a faint echo of Eliza's scream, rising from deep within the hospital, hinting that the cycle may never end.
Subscribe for more videos.